Hello and welcome to India Reads. We are reading The Enchantress of Florence and we are in chapter number 4. Let's continue. Long before the unsettling arrival in Fatehpur Sikri of the yellow-haired liar from the foreign parts with his tales of enchantress and spells, Jodha had known that her illustrious husband must have had witchcraft in his blood. Everyone had heard about Genghis Khan's necromancy, his use of animal sacrifice and occult herbs, and how, with the help of black arts, he managed to sire 800,000 descendants. Everyone had heard the tale of how Timur the Lame had burnt the Quran and, after conquering the earth, had tried to ascend to the stars and conquer the heavens too. Everyone knew the story of how Emperor Babur had saved the dying Humayun's life by circling his sick bed and luring death away from the boy to the father, sacrificing himself so that his son might live. These dark paths with death and the devil were her husband's heritage, and her own existence the proof of how strong magic was in him. The creation of a real life from a dream was a superhuman act, usurping the prerogative of the gods. In those days, Sikri was swarming with poets and artists, those preening egoists who claim for themselves the power of language and image to conjure beautiful somethings from empty nothings, and yet neither poet nor painter, musician nor sculptor had come close to what the emperor, the perfect man, had achieved. The court was also full of foreigners, pomaded exotics, weather-beaten merchants, narrow-faced priests out of the West, mounting in ugly, desirable tongues about the majesty of their lands, their gods, their kings. Through a stone screen covering a high window on the upper story of the quarters, she looked down at the great walled courtyard of the seat of public audience and watched the thronging aliens strut and preen. When the emperor showed her the pictures they brought with them out of their mountains and valleys, she thought of the Himalayas and Kashmir and laughed at the foreigners' paltry approximations of natural beauty. Their walls and Alps, half words to describe half things. Their kings were savages and they had nailed their gods to a tree. What did she want with people as ridiculous as that? Their stories didn't impress her either. She had heard from an emperor a traveler's tale of an ancient sculpture or sculptor of the Greeks who had brought a woman to life and fell in love with her. That narrative did not end well and in any case was a fable for children. It could not well it could not be compared to her actual existence. Here, after all, she quite simply was. Only one man on all the earth had ever achieved such a feat of creation by pure act of will. She wasn't interested in the foreign travelers, though she knew that they fascinated the emperor. They came in search of what exactly? Nothing of use. If they had possessed any wisdom, the inutility of their journey would have been obvious to them. Travel was pointless. It removed you from the place in which you had meaning and to which you gave meaning in return by dedicating your life to it, and it sprinted you away from into fairylands where you were and looked frankly absurd. Yes, this place, Sikri, was a fairyland to them, just as their England and Portugal, their Holland and France, and were beyond their ability to comprehend. The world was not at all one thing. We are their dreams, she had told the emperor, and they are ours. She loved him because he never dismissed her opinions, never swatted them away with the majesty of his hands. But imagine Jodha, he told her, when they slapped down the Ganifa playing cards one evening. If we could awaken other man's dream and change them, and if we had the courage to invite them into ours. What if the world had become a single waking dream? She could not call him fantasist when he spoke of waking dreams. For what else was she? She had never left the palaces in which she had been born a decade earlier, born as an adult to a man who was not only her creator but her lover. It was true, she was both his wife and his child. If she left the palaces, or she had or so she had suspected, the spell would have been broken and she would cease to exist. Perhaps she could do it if he, the emperor, were there to sustain her with the strength of his belief. But if she were alone, she wouldn't have the chance. Fortunately, she had no desire to leave. The labyrinth of walled and curtained corridors that connected the various buildings of the palace complex afforded her with all the possibilities of travel she required. This was her little universe. She lacked a conqueror's interest in elsewhere. Lest the world would be for others, the square of the fortified stone was hers. She was a woman without a past, separate from history of, or rather possessing only such a history as he had been pleased to bestow upon her, and which other queens bitterly contested. The question of her independent existence, of whether she had one, insisted on being asked over and over whether she willed it or not. If God turned his face away from his creation, would man simply cease to be? That was a large scale version of this question, but it was selfish. Small scale versions that bothered her. Was her free will of a man who had willed her into being? Did she exist only because of his suspension of disbelief in the possibility of her existence? If he had died, could she go on living? She felt her quickening. She felt a quickening of her pulse. Something was about to happen. She felt herself strengthen, solidify. Doubts fled from her. He was coming. The emperor had entered the palace complex, and she could feel the power of his approaching need. Yes, something was about to happen. She felt his footfall in her blood. She could see him in himself, growing larger as he walked towards her. She was his mirror because he had created her that way. She was his mirror because he had created her that way, but she was herself as well. Yes, now the act of creation was complete. She was free to be the person he had created, free as everyone else, within the bounds of what was in their nature to be and do. How strong she suddenly was, how full of blood and rage. His power over her was far from absolute. All, all she had was to be coherent. She had never felt more coherent. Her nature rushed into her like a flood. She was not subservient. He did not like a subservient woman. She would scold him first. How could he stay away for so long? In his absence, she had to combat many plots. All was untrustworthy here. The very walls were filled with whispers. She fought them all and kept the palace safe against the day of his return, defeating the small, self serving treacheries of the domestic staff, confounding the spying lizards hanging on the wall, stilling the scurry of conspiratorial mice. All this while she felt herself fading, while the mere struggle for survival required the exercise of almost the full force of her will. The other queens, no, she would not mention the other queens. The other queens did not exist, only she existed. She too was a sorceress. She was a sorceress of herself. There was only one man she needed to enchant, and here he was. She was not going to the other queens. He was not going to the other queens. He was coming to what pleased him. She was full of him. All all his desire for her, of something that was about to happen. She was a scholar of his need. She knew everything. The door opened. She existed. She was immortal because she had been created by love. He was wearing a cockaded golden turban and a coat of gold brocade. He was wearing the dust of his conquered land like a soldier's badge of honor. He was wearing a sheepish grin. I wanted to get home faster, he said. I was delayed. There was something awkward and experimental about his speech. What was the matter with him? She decided to ignore his uncharacteristic hesitancy and proceeded as she had planned. Oh, you wanted, she said, standing upright in her ordinary day clothes, pulling a silken headscarf across the lower portion of her face. A man does not know what he wants. A man does not know what he says he wants. A man only wants what he needs. He was puzzled by her refusal to acknowledge his descent into the first person, which honored her, which was supposed to make her swoon with joy, which was his newest discovery and his declaration of love. puzzled, and a little put off. "How many men have you known that you are so knowledgeable?" he said, frowning, approaching her. "Did you dream up men for yourself while I was away? Or did you find men to pleasure you, men who were not dreams? Are, are there men that I must kill?" Surely this time she would notice the revolutionary, the erotic newness of the pronouns. Surely now she would understand what he was trying to say. She did not. She believed that she knew what aroused him and was thinking only of the words she had to say to make him hers. Women think less about men in general than the generality of men can imagine. Women think about their own men less often than men like to believe. All women need all men less than all men need them. This is why it is so important to keep a good woman down. If you do not keep her down, she will surely go away. She hadn't dressed up to receive him. "If you want dolls," she said, "go out to the dollhouse where they're waiting for you, prettifying and squealing and pulling each one another's hair." This was a mistake. She had mentioned the other queens. His brow furrowed and his eyes clouded over. She had made a false move. The spell had almost broken. She poured out all the force of her eyes into his, and he came back to her. The magic held. She raised her voice and continued. She didn't flatter him. "You already look like an old man," she said. "Your sons will imagine that you are their grandfather." She did not congratulate him on the victories. If history had gone down a different path, she said, then only gods would still rule. The gods you have defeated. The many-limbed, many-headed gods, full of stories and deeds inside. And instead of punishment and laws, the gods of being standing beside the goddesses of doing, dancing gods, laughing gods, gods of thunderbolts and flutes, so many, many gods. And maybe that would have been an improvement. She knew she was beautiful, and now dropping the thin silk veil, she unleashed the beauty that she had kept inside, and he was lost. When a boy dreams of a woman, he gives her big breasts and a small brain, she murmured. When a king imagines a wife, he dreams of me. She was adept at the 7 types of unigulation, which is to say the art of using the nails to enhance the act of love. Before he left on a long journey, she had marked him with the 3 deep marks, which were scratches made by the first 3 fingers of her right hand upon his back, his chest, and on his testicles as well. Something to remember her by. Now that he was home, she could make him shudder, could actually make his hair stand on end by placing her nails on his cheeks and lower lips and breasts without leaving any mark. Or could she mark him, leaving a half moon shape upon his neck? She could push her nails down slowly on his face for a long time. She could make long marks on his head and thighs and again his always sensitive breasts. She could perform the hopping of the hair, making the aureola around his nipples without touching him anywhere close to his body. And no living woman was as skilled as she was in the peacock's foot. That delicate maneuver, she placed her thumb on his left nipple and her 4 other fingers as she walked around his breast, digging in her long nails, her curved claw-like nails, which she had guarded and sharpened in anticipation of this very moment, pushing them into the emperor's skin until they left marks resemble the trail left by a peacock as it walks through mud. She knew what he would say when she did these things. She could He could tell her how in the loneliness of his army tent he would close his eyes and imitate her movements, would imagine his nails mowing on his body to be hers and be aroused. She waited for him to say it, but he didn't. Something was different. There was an impatience in him now, even an irritation and annoyance she did not understand. It was as if the many sophistications of the lover's art had lost their charms, and he simply wished to possess her and be done with it. She understood that he had changed. Now everything else would change as well. As for the emperor, he never again referred to himself in the singular in the presence of another person. He was plural in the eyes of the world, plural even in the judgment of the woman who loved him, and plural he would remain. He had learnt his lesson. Let's go to the next chapter. his sons riding their horses at speed. His sons riding their horses at speed, aiming lances at 10 pegs in the ground. His sons still on horseback, excelling at the game of chogan, swinging long sticks with curved feet and striking the bull into a netted goal. His sons playing polo at night with the luminous ball. His sons on hunting parties, being initiated into the mystery of the leopard shooting by the master of the hunt, his sons taking part in the game of love, Ishkbazi, and a fair of racing pigeons. How beautiful they were, his sons! How mightily they played! See the Crown Prince Salim, at only 14, already and so arch, expert an archer that the rules of the sport were being rewritten to accommodate him. Ah, Murad, Daniel, my gallopers, the emperor thought. How he loved them, and yet the wastrels they were. Look at their eyes, they were already drunk. They were 11 and 10 years, and they were already drunk. Drunk in charge of horses, the fools. He had given strict instructions to the staff, but these were princes of the blood, and no servant dared gainsay them. He was he was having them spied on, of course. So he knew all about Salim's opium habits and the nightly feats of perverted lechery. Perhaps it was understandable that a young fellow in the first flush of his potency should develop a fondness for sodomizing ventures, but a word in his ear would be soon necessary because the dancing girls were complaining. Their bruised rears, their vandalized pomegranate buds made it harder for them to perform the little woes. Oh, alas, alas for his debauched children, the flesh of his flesh, hair to his failings, and none of his strength. Prince Murad's falling sickness had been far concealed from the populace at large, but for how long? And Daniel seemed good for nothing, seemed not to have any personality at all, though he had inherited the family's good looks, an achievement which he could take no legitimate pride, although in his preening vanity he did. Was it harsh to judge a 10-year-old boy in this way? Yes, of course it was, but these were not boys. These were little gods, these the despots of the future, born of unfortunately to rule. He loved them, they would betray him. They were the lights of his life. They would come for him when he slept. The little ass fuckers. He was waiting for their moves. The king wished today, as he did every day, that he could trust his sons. He trusted Birbal and Jodha and Abul Faiz and Todarmal, but he kept the boys under close surveillance. He longed to trust them so that they could be the strong supports of his old age. He dreamt of relying on their six beautiful eyes when his own grew grim, and on their six strong arms when his own lost their power, acting in unison at his behest, so that he would only truly become as God, the many headed, multi limbed. He wanted to trust them because he thought of trust as a virtue and wished to cultivate it. And because but he knew the history of his blood. He knew that trustworthiness was not his people's habit. His sons would grow up into glittering heroes with excellent mustaches, and they would turn against him. He could already see it in their eyes. Among their kind, among the Changari of the Fargana, it was customary for children to plot against their crowned sizes, to attempt to dethrone them, to imprison them in their own fortress or on islands in lakes, or to execute them with their own swords. Salim, bless him, the bloodthirsty wretch, was already dreaming up ingenious methods of killing people. If anyone betrays me, Papa, I will slaughter an ass and I'll have the traitor sewed up inside the animal's flayed wet skin. I will slit him backwards on a donkey and parade him through the streets at noon and let the hot sun do its work. A cruel sun would dry up the carcass and as that so that it slowly contracted, so that the enemy within died of strangulated suffocation. Where did you come up with an idea such nasty as that? The emperor asked his son. I made it up, the boy lied. And who are you to speak of cruelty, Papa? I myself saw you draw out a sword and cut off the feet of the man who stole a pair of shoes. The emperor knew the truth when he heard it. If there was darkness in Prince Salim, then it had been inherited from the King of Kings himself. Salim was his favorite son, his most likely assassin. When he was gone, the three brothers would fight like dogs in the street over the merely bone of his power. When he closed his eyes, he listened to the galloping hoofs of his children, as he could see Salim leading a rebellion against him and falling like a puny runt he was. We will forgive him, of course. We will let him live. Our son, so fine a horseman, so shiny, and with a hearty laugh, the emperor sighed. He did not trust his sons. The question of love was rendered more mysterious by such manners. The king loved the three boys galloping before him on the Maidan. If he were to die at their hands, he would love the arm that delivered the fatal blow. However, he did not plan to let the young bastards do him in. Not when there was breath in his body. He would see them in hell first. He was the Emperor Akbar. Let no man trifle with him. He had trusted the mystic Chishti whose tomb stood in the courtyard of the Friday mosque. But Chishti was dead. He trusted dogs, music, poetry, a witty courtier, and a wife he had created out of nothing. He trusted beauty, painting, and the wisdom of his forebears. In other words, however, he was losing confidence in, for example, religious faith. He knew that life was not to be trusted, the world was not to be relied upon. On the gate of his great mosque, he had carved out the motto which was not his own, but belonged, so had to be told, to Jesus of Nazareth. The world's a bridge, pass over it, but build no house upon it. He did not believe his own motto, he scolded himself, for he had built not just a house but an entire city. Who hopes for an hour hopes for eternity. The world is an hour. What follows is unseen. It's true to be acknowledged. It's true, he acknowledged silently. I hope for too much. I hope for eternity. An hour's not enough for me. I hope for greatness, which is more than men should desire. That I felt good when he said to himself. It made him more intimate with himself. It would remain, but it would remain a private matter, one that had been resolved. I hope for a long life, he thought, and for peace, for understanding, and a good meal in the afternoon. Above all things, I hope for a young man I can trust. That young man will not be my son, but I will make him more than my son. I will make him my hammer and my anvil. I will make him my beauty and my truth. He will stand upon my palm and fill the sky. That very day, a yellow-haired young man was brought before him, wearing an absurd long coat made up of particulared leather longins and holding a letter from the Queen of England in hand. Okay, with this we will stop today's reading and let's recap. Today's reading has all been about Akbar, his fictitious wife Jodha, how he's created from her from thin air, but she still exists. She exists because she's built by him, and he's an important person. So when he would come to her, she would be there. Now she did not have the issues of the other women, which is an existence where she had to fight with each other. She could remain isolated, but she would constantly have to fight uh, believability, because she was not true. She was created in the mind of the great emperor, and and she did not have a past. She was an adult conjured by an emperor. So if she had to have history, he would have to create it, and he would not bother about that. And 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 this is a perspective that he brings out so beautifully, that here is a imaginary person who is fighting to be known, fighting to be recognized, an imaginary person who exists only in the four walls of a palace and cannot move out anywhere. But she doesn't want to move out anywhere. She knows that she's created for a purpose. She knows that history will remember her more than all the other queens. And so the emperor has come from a war, and he comes and directly goes to her, and she's obviously not dressed up to meet him, and he's a little disappointed by that. He would have liked her to be ready and available and dressed up for him. But then she reminds him that she's not like his other dolls, his other queens, who are there only for him, to please him, to squeal over each other and fight for him. She was created by him, and she was an independent soul, and that's the way he wanted, because that's the way he created her. And therefore she was how she was. She was not dressed up to meet him that point of time, because that's the way possibly he wanted somebody who could rebel against him. And then there is a lot of writing about the lovemaking that she would do to him. Her nails plunged into different parts of his body, so that he would carry the scars, or he would carry her memory with him wherever he was fighting. And when he was back, she would make a lot of love to him. Now this is obviously the emperor playing with himself, because she did not exist, or rather she existed in his mind. So in his mind he was making love to himself, and therefore when he was away from the palace, he would recollect her and do whatever he wanted, as as he would imagine how she would arouse him. So this is another section that has been covered very in a very detailed manner by the author. And then there is the question of his children. So this is how the next chapter starts. So the emperor has three children, and they are in their they're not even in their teens. Only the eldest one is getting to his teens. But they're beautiful boys, but they're boys who were the emperor's children. So they were spoiled by drinking, they were spoiled by the riches. They did not care for him that much. They were how emperor's children would be. They were not very loyal to him. They were already showing signs that they would fight and usurp the throne. That was not the way they were brought up to be, that but that was in their genes. That was who they were. That's something that they had inherited from him. He could see that. He could still never take them away. He gave a lot of attention and uh, affection and power to his fictitious wife, to his trusted courtiers, his trusted Birbal, his trusted Todarmal, and his poets, and a few select set of people. But he would not give that level of affection and trust and loyalty to his children, because he knew that they would betray. Now, could he control them? Now, yes, he could, but eventually they would rise against him. But now was his time, and so he would do what he could do. But he also loved his children, so he gave them whatever best he could. Uh, his eldest son was Salim, who already had habits of taking opium. And the other two children, Daniel and the third one I forget, were obviously wastrels, because they had been brought up in a life of richness and not knowing reality. Uh, they were 10 and 12, but they were showing signs of becoming debauched uh, princes who would fight against each other for the piece of throne. So this is how it's been described. Now he is looking for somebody who he could trust, somebody who he could make his own son, and give him the love and affection that he always wanted to. Someone who didn't if he it didn't matter, even if it was not his own flesh and blood, but he wanted somebody who could be at least an heir to his thoughts, an heir to his ideas, who could carry on his ideas and thoughts and his legacy, which is there in his mind and which is important to him. And this is where the yellow haired traveler enters his life. And that's why we've taken a break, and we would continue from here in the next reading. I hope you found today's reading interesting. I certainly did. I enjoyed this the most uh, in the last 3 4 readings I've done about the book, and I think now the story is catching up. It should be interesting. Let's see if we can do it more regularly and do it well. Till we catch up the next time, do take care of yourself. You have an awesome day. Bye bye.